So today, we wanted to present on TEFRA. There's a lot of moving pieces with TEFRA and just kind of understanding the process of how you get connected, enrolled, or if you maybe say you have youth that is transitioning from TEFRA into adult Medicaid. So we have some key players to the table, and I'll let you go ahead and do your introductions. Go for it, Josh.
My name's Josh Shankus. I work for Turning Stones Care Coordination. I'm in the process of getting my certification. I've been shadowing under Brittany for over 3 years now. And so I hope to get my certification and then primarily do TEFRA because, I mean, that's what I've been surrounded by it for the last 3 years, and I've learned a lot. So I think there's a void and I want to help fill it.
And I'm Heather Allen. I'm a care coordinator at Supernova Advocates. So we've been around for 4 years, I think now, and doing TEFRA the whole time too. And so it's been a learning process because when we first started, nobody really knew what TEFRA was. And I think there were 2 care coordinators in the state that did TEFRA at all at that point. So it's been a real learning curve.
And I'm Sina Fisher, and I'm a trainer with the state of Alaska, specifically Senior Disability Services. And believe it or not, we have a very small portion of what we do with TEFRA. It's very defined and very small compared to other things that we do to help people navigate supports and services in the community.
I am Cassandra Lynch, and I'm a trainer with Senior Disability as well.
Well, we sure do appreciate you taking time out of your day. And Kayla, our artist, put that "What in the world is TEFRA" up on the board. So I think that is very appropriate. So we would like, if we could, just to kind of divvy up portions of today's Lunch and Learn. So, Tina, if you could talk more about what SDS does when an application comes your way. You start out with you, Heather, kind of going like an overview of what TEFRA is, and then kind of your portion of stepping foot in and when you would make contact with the family, and at that point, moving forward with what you would do. Does that sound like a game plan?
Sure. All right, TEFRA, it's an acronym, stands for Tax Equity Fiscal Responsibility Act, right? Something like that. Sometimes it's referred to as Katie Beckett money or the Katie Beckett grant or whatever. It is basically a Medicaid eligibility. It is, you have to have a level of care to receive this Medicaid eligibility, and that's where the care coordinators come in. The only thing that SDS does is to determine the level of care for ICF, IID, which is Intermediate Care Facility for people with intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, or individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities. Yes, there's a quiz later, right? Yeah. It just basically means that without supports in the community, institutionalization would eventually happen. And we don't want to do that. So we want to make sure that the Medicaid supports can come up and support a young person who is perhaps in a family that doesn't necessarily meet Medicaid financial qualifiers. Okay, we don't want to limit any family, any American family from striving, growing, being able to make more than $50,000 a year. The most heartbreaking thing to hear is a parent who is holding themselves back in their career because if I make too much money, my child won't be on Medicaid anymore. Okay, so Katie Beckett came from a woman, her name Katie, of course, and she had a lot of respiratory issues, a lot of autoimmune disorders, that sort of thing. She wound up spending most of her childhood and teens in the hospital because the cares that she needed were medically intensive. But she would wander around the hospital and talk with people, do all the wonderful things that our chattery children and teens do, right? So her family, though, had to not really keep themselves impoverished. They were actually a wealthy family, but not wealthy enough for these medical cares. It's ridiculously and way more expensive now, 30 years later, to do this. So they appealed to President Reagan at the time and said, you know, we'd really like our daughter to be home with us, and she could be, were it not for these medical cares. So this TEFRA Act came into place to allow these young people, young adults, or children to be able to receive the medical supports that they need in order to live in their homes and go to school and that sort of stuff. Now, there's a whole nother layer of waiving the Medicaid requirement to be in a hospital. This just allows this family that would not normally meet Medicaid qualifiers to a pathway in. So it's a pathway into Medicaid eligibility.
Based on the child's income.
Mm-hmm. And really the only piece that SDS handles is the level of care determination for the IDD, intellectual developmental disability. That's it.
Can you speak a little bit of what that level of care consists of, who actually completes it?
We do have qualified, QIRP, qualified intellectual developmental disability specialists, basically. Through their education and experience, they're qualified to administer something called an ICAP, an Inventory for Client Agency Planning, been around 25 plus years, a little bit archaic, but is very proprietary. So there are things that we can't change. Like one of the questions to the people that we interview that would be around an individual who is seeking level of care, we interview 3 individuals at the ICAP, and one of the questions they ask is, would this person be able to dial a rotary phone? Well, heck, most 14-year-olds couldn't dial a rotary phone right now.
Maybe like, what is that?
Yeah, exactly. But we can't remove that question, though, because it's a proprietary tool. But it basically, the ICAP is administered to the 3, we call them respondents. One can be a parent or an individual who lives every day, 24/7 with this person. The 2 other people need to be very integral in the person's life. A teacher that sees them, you know, more times than not. A grandparent, a sibling, some therapist is a good one. Mm-hmm. All people that are looking to support this person and are familiar with their daily supports. Because it's one thing for me to say, sure, my 14-year-old can go in and make an after-school snack, or when they come home from school, I don't even get home for 2 hours. All I do is send them a list and says, you better do this or mom's going to strangle you, right? Very different than my friend whose son is autistic. There's no way that he could go home by himself, make an afternoon snack, do the chores, that sort of thing. He needs that kind of care. So when we sit down and say, can your child feed themselves? Her answer is yes, my answer is yes. Hers is different though. Mine is, go get it, you're hungry, there's the kitchen. Hers is, okay, I'll make you a sandwich, I will cut it up, I will sit right there and remind you to eat the sandwich and not the other things on the table, because he also has pica and he'll eat anything that fits, right? So the answer is still yes, but they're different. So when we go through the ICAP process, we identify to the minutia, what is that level of difference? It isn't just this broad question, it's very detailed. So that's the ICAP determination, which then is scored and says whether or not we have intellectual developmental disability determination. Some other things that come into that are, as the DDRC team knows, therapist notes, other doctors that they visited with, what are their official diagnoses, which for young people change, grow, modify, that sort of thing. And so keeping up with that, I think especially for TEFRA individuals, keeping up with that growing. How is this modifying? You know, nobody grows through life the same way. Nobody, regardless of what your diagnosis is. All kids grow and mature differently, and all people with autism grow and mature differently, or cerebral palsy, or any of that. Another question?
I think that pretty much covers that part of just like the assessment of what SDS does.
That's what we do, and that's really after these guys get involved.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So TEFRA is basically it's a form of Medicaid, which she was talking about. And it's meant for families that, their child has some sort of diagnosis that requires additional medical supports than what a typical age peer would have, right? So maybe they have cerebral palsy, and so they have to go to OT-PT every week. And oftentimes what I see is families, because they're high enough income that they don't qualify for family Medicaid, more often than not, they have their own private insurance too. They've got private insurance through work. So Medicaid becomes kind of a secondary insurance for them. And then because their child is going to therapies often or something, maybe their private insurance only covers 20 visits a year, but their child has to go, every single week. So 52 visits or more, right? And so it becomes a big financial strain on families. And so TEFRA ends up being that secondary insurance, so it picks up all the remaining ones that the private insurance isn't covering anymore. So that's what I end up seeing a lot from the families that I work with, is that they do have a private insurance, but they want this as a secondary insurance so that they have full kind of coverage for their child instead of only having one or the other. So with that, we would get families, I don't know about you guys, but I know most of our families, come from doctor's office referrals.
Yeah, quite a few do.
So what happens is you go to the doctor, and the doctors are the ones that are realizing, like, oh, your child has some sort of diagnosis that is going to require more supports. And so they're the ones that are saying, you should really consider TEFRA. And so people come to us and are like, what is TEFRA? I don't know what that is. Somebody told me to get it. I should, how does this work? And so I know most of the agencies, care coordination agencies, have some sort of breakdown that's a pretty lengthy email or just breakdown of what to expect with TEFRA and how the process works. And so really, there's a pretty thorough packet, which we have a lot of the forms here, to apply to DPA first, because you have to do kind of that overall Medicaid eligibility for your child. And so it does break it down, showing that your child would qualify. And really, none of the children that I know, at least, have an income that puts them over the Medicaid limit, right? Because even though as a family, maybe we have a house, we have a car, we have a boat, we have a whatever, my child doesn't have any of those things. I have those as the parent, right?
Does child support count as their income, the child?
No, because that is for the care of them, but it's not like the check isn't being written to that child for them to be getting, right?
The only thing I've seen is when they have a savings account for the college fund,
Yeah.
which some of them do, and some of them do just have medical concerns, because Sina pretty much just talked about the IDD, but there are children who are psychiatric, and they're very, those are probably one of our most challenging ones to get approved, but if you have the paperwork to back it up, then it's helpful. And then also critically medically challenged children. So, and they can go on to, having college and doing whatever they want. So,
And so it's
sometimes they need those accounts,
it's
but becomes a
the
problem.
bank accounts that your child's name is a part of too. That can become tricky. And so for kids that we work with, they end up getting trusts set up instead of just a standard savings account, because the money that's in the savings account with the child's name associated, that does count against their Medicaid eligibility income. So we start out doing that DPA piece, make sure the eligibility is there and that it's within that Medicaid income limit. And then once we get the go-ahead, DPA will send out a referral to whoever the care coordinators that might be working with you already, as well as Comagene.
The yellow
It used to
packet
be
is
something
the
else. It used
to
space
be
and
Qualis.
permission
Yeah,
to
it was
release
Qualis, yeah.
information. You can write, if you have a care coordinator in mind, then you can write their information and the permission to release and submit that to DPA. And then DPA will have them in the system and will send it, they will fax it and email it to the care coordinator, so they'll know when it's being reviewed, and
And then you'll be connected to
Yeah.
the case, and they'll
they'll give you
continually
a
get
date
updates.
when everything has to be turned in by.
And more often than not, you are going to work with a care coordinator first. I mean, at times there have been people that have made it through that first process and then call us and we're like, what? Good
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, good job. So once that's been established, then we get the referral. And that's when we figure out as a care coordinator which level of care type to seek for your child, right? And so that's where we'll ask quite a few questions and say, tell me a little bit about your child, what kind of diagnosis is going on, all this other stuff. With the packet you're submitting to DPA. I know our agency prefers to get a copy of that packet because really you are compiling a lot of information for this packet to DPA. Some of it is school records, some of it's medical records, any evaluations your child has had already. So you've already pulled together a lot of information that's good for us. And so we do request a copy of that as our agency, because then we can start pulling information from there already and hopefully answer some of the questions we already have, right? And so we figure out level of care type, and then we simultaneously kind of work on level of care and the plan of care piece. And really that plan of care piece is just kind of an overall generalization of what could your child access through Medicaid, right? So what are all of the Medicaid services that are available for your child if they need that, right? So it's not meant to be like, my child goes to OT, so I'm only listing out OT. I'm listing out all the different therapy options, all of the different, like eyeglasses, ophthalmology, dental, anything that your child might access throughout the year, we're putting that into the plan of care because it's giving you that option, provided that you're doing a Medicaid provider and that it's something your doctor is recommending. So once we submit the level of care piece, which one type of level of care is what Sienna was talking about, that gets sent to the state, but there are 2 other types. In my opinion, I don't think you need to know what types they are really, because it's just a lot of information, and that's what the care coordinators are here for. Like, we know what types of level of care there are. So you just tell us kind of about your child, and we can help you figure out which one might qualify. Otherwise, sometimes it's just too much information. So you get the level of care, the plan of care. We turn those into the appropriate providers, whether it's Comagin or SDS, and then just wait for the approval to come back. Once that approval comes back, if your child is approved, you're good for 1 full year of service for TEFRA. TEFRA that's kind of what we do. We don't see you all the time. We just talk to you during your renewal time, make sure things are going well, see what kind of updates you have medically for your child. If you have questions throughout the year, we'll answer questions and do stuff like that. But otherwise, there's not a lot of interaction between care coordinator and TEFRA families because it's not really the name of the game for what TEFRA is providing you. It's really meant to be more of just that secondary kind of insurance for your child specifically. I do know a lot of families that when their child has some sort of medical, like extra medical things going on, and they have to fly out of state for supports, like maybe they have to fly to Seattle Children's Hospital, that's a big area where families have been super thankful to have TEFRA because that is such a big expense on your family to have to go outside, and then maybe your private insurance isn't covering that much of it, or even just the travel, flights, the hotel, all of that stuff.
I think they cover one companion.
Mhm.
And so if you want both you and your husband or something to go, then you do have to cover your husband, but they will cover that
Yeah,
currently.
the child, and then one companion person to go with, one escort.
Are you hearing that they're reining that in?
There's just been a lot of cuts happening
We
lately.
just got
so I'm
our
just always
first
hesitant.
ever denial, ever,
Oh, really?
and it was after the fact. So I'm just kind of waiting to see what's gonna happen.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't heard that yet.
The Shriners is gonna eat it, or if they're gonna charge it back to me, or what.
I know they always say don't pay it until you get it figured out. Because
I didn't book the
Medicaid
tickets.
won't.
I mean, I didn't
Oh,
do it,
okay, yeah.
So I'm assuming that somewhere along the line that people, didn't really know how much they were.
Yeah, and because there are intricacies for sure between like the doctor here that you're seeing in Alaska versus the doctor that you're going to see. And so they've got their own paperwork that they've got to work out and make sure that it is saying the right things to get that referral to go down, because it is expensive, it's expensive to fly
Insurance and
down
all
and
of
go
that,
down.
everybody else play a part as well.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
so
have a family that goes, every month or every
Yeah,
other month for their
because
child to Seattle?
Yeah. it's at least 7 times a year. They
Yeah.
fly, and they live in remote, so they're not within driving distance to Anchorage even. So they have to get a day of travel to Anchorage and then travel from Anchorage to Seattle, and that's all covered by TEFRA. So
yeah. Well, and it's definitely meant to be as specific to your child of what their needs are and their care is that's requiring the extra medical support, right?
and doctors also can help a huge part in what their notes say, and because I mean, sometimes have families tell us like, this is currently what the medical situation is. And then you pull the notes from all the appointments in the last year and the doctor is like, oh yeah, everything looks great. I'll just see him again in a year.
Mhm.
And then you have to get more records so that you can show like, this is still an issue and this is still an issue. And then it's as sad as it is, it's like you have to justify the needs and you can't really hold your child up on this pedestal. They're doing great, everything's improving, because if they're not going to meet the level of care by talking or by
Talking about what they can do.
what they
really.
can
I
do.
mean,
Yeah.
it's true.
And I do think that as parents, we all do that. You know, we all are like, oh, my child is doing really awesome. But then it's when you kind of like stop them and slow down and be like, oh, wait a second, I really am still doing all of these things, even though we're not talking about it, right? So maybe my child has improved some. And so like in my mind, it's doing really awesome. Like she's doing great. But when you break it down, and that's a lot of what the ICAP does too, is making sure that it's not just like talking about all the great things that my child has done recently. It's also talking about the actual needs and what my child, how they're sitting at compared to an age appropriate peer.
I think what's helped some parents is I'll say, because you'll do 4 a lot and you don't even think about it. So I'll just say, on your child's worst day, without your help, can they do this?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think thinking about it that way has really been like, oh, well, no.
Yeah.
But they
helped
do,
my child,
because I do it, but I didn't even think about it that way.
Yeah.
Right, but that's how you need to look at it.
Mhm.
Apply for it, so,
Anticipate their needs.
yeah, anticipate the need.
Yeah, I have a question. So what if, like on the plan of care, if you don't list braces or travel out of state, but it comes up unexpectedly, is that something that needs amended? Or are they looking that specifically
For
back?
TEFRA, the plan of care and TEFRA and the plan of cares for the Medicaid like home and community-based waivers, the TEFRA plan of care is more like a generic document that it's like these things could happen, but they won't necessarily. And even there's a cost sheet where for travel, you don't put a dollar amount. You can either put there's none planned in the next year,
Mhm.
or you just put X for the dollar amount or the number of trips sometimes.
Say you did
It's-
not put the X on the travel, but it comes up unexpectedly.
It still should be available.
Yeah. I've had it where the parents didn't think that they were going to be traveling, and then they ended up having to go down and travel, and they were still able
Or
to do
So
it.
it's
emergencies
kind
could
of once
come
they
up.
qualify a blanket coverage almost.
Yeah.
Okay.
There should be things that TEFRA covers, like the number of appointments with certain specialists, and then just like any insurance, and things that it doesn't. And it shouldn't just be if it was listed that it's covered, it should just be covered. And then if it's needed, it's covered.
Because it's what we're doing as the TEFRA coordinators, we're just making sure that you have this availability, but then really it's coming down to the doctor to justify why they're sending a referral for something, or why. So it's the doctor proving that, yes, this person has cerebral palsy, so they need to go to physical therapy. They need to go to occupational therapy. It's not that us as care coordinators need to write it into the support plan. It's just ours is kind of just a generalization saying like, here are all of the things that you could access through Medicaid, but not that you will access through Medicaid this year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Like
Would it-
Medicaid would.
I'm sorry, would that be something that you would do like at the beginning? Say if I'm a new parent trying to get TEFRA and we go to fill out this application, that would be our beginning stage with the care coordinator of filling out all the documents, and if like say within 3 to 4 months, something else different comes up, we come back to you guys and say we need something else, or would that be, it's already there
Once the
once
TEFRA is
qualified?
approved, the doctor, like if they need speech therapy services, then the doctor would have to do a referral for that. The care coordinator is really only needed for the renewal.
Initial and renewal,
And then
okay.
if you have any questions about the renewal.
That's what I was trying to ask.
Approved,
Yeah.
But we do get contacted by some families throughout the year that say their Medicaid was cut off. And so then we usually have to start.
We
troubleshooting
generally
to pay
have
Medicaid.
nothing, if the TEFRA level of care approval was done, then it's nothing from the care coordinator.
Yeah,
It's
sometimes
gotta
the
be
DPA
something.
Medicaid puts in something wrong.
Yeah.
It could be a lot
Somebody
of
gets
things.
switches, and so we have to help with that. So I mean, there are questions throughout the year where families will say like, hey, this just happened. Can you help me with this? And more often than not, like we provide resources and say, here's how to kind of move forward and fix things if there's something going on, or if you have a question, we can help you kind of figure out who to talk to, who to ask. But in my experience, I have yet to have a TEFRA family that needed me to be the one doing a lot of stuff, because more often than not, what TEFRA is helping them with is getting their medical coverage. And so when they're asking questions, they're asking their doctor, they're asking their therapist, they're asking their, something like that. It's not usually me. Like, even though I might get calls, but then I would say, hey, we should really talk to your therapist about that one. Your PT is the one that would know how often you should be going. It seems kind of tricky, but it's really not. So you can definitely reach out to your care coordinator if you have questions, but we would be then rerouting and saying, oh, really? I think that's the doctor question. Like, they should be sending a referral for you. Because we can't write referrals for medical providers.
It is a
That's
lot.
why I should talk to
Question,
her.
yeah. And the only reason I'm asking these questions, we kind of went through this some years ago, and I have a grandson that's autistic. We had a TEFRA application, got it from DPA. No one could tell us where to begin.
Yeah.
So how would a person know where to begin with a TEFRA application? They get the
Co-managing
application and then
help
do what?
As the list of care coordinators that take TEFRA, and TEFRA is different from the home and community-based waivers
How
because
would they know that
that's a
to
good
start
question.
that
Care
part? That's what I'm
coordinators are
saying.
prohibited from soliciting, so they can't, if they see someone who they know has a disability, they can't approach that person and say, I offer care coordination services, because number one, they could have a care coordinator already, or maybe they're doing fine and they don't need services, and you're offering services that they don't need, thinking that they
They
need
may
that.
need
So
service.
care coordinators have to be contacted by families or have referrals put out from other people to contact them. So either a therapist has to let a family know, a doctor has to let a family know, Stone Soup Group. The schools surprisingly know very little about what
Absolutely,
services are available.
absolutely. And what I did find was, even at DPA did not know to say, contact the care coordinator or contact such and such. So how can that part be helped? Because normally when you need Medicaid, either you're on regular Medicaid, and now you find your regular Medicaid do not cover speech, OT, whatever else service. And then they say, oh, you may need TEFRA, but you go to try to fill out TEFRA, and you're like, how, what? And doing
I
that,
wish
no
there
one
was a
is
simple
saying,
answer,
here's
but I don't
help,
have one.
here's who to call.
I would say that Stone Soup Group would probably be, and I'm not just saying that being in Stone Soup Group, but that's kind of where the assistance with finding a care coordinator that is then apart from everything else would be where we would start. So if I have a family come in and they say, hey, this is what's going on, I tried applying for Medicaid, I'm not sure what's available out there, then that's where DDRC would step in and say, well, hey, have you thought about TEFRA? Do you know about this? Let's contact some care coordinators together, and really kind of dive deeper into what I think DPA is aware of when it comes to applying for anything that's developmental disability related.
I'd really like to hear more about, I mean, we can talk about developmental disability quite a lot, but you mentioned the two other levels of care.
Nursing facility level of care and intermediate psychiatric hospital level.
Right, yeah. I'd like to know more about that, because I really think, and I've been with the state doing this for about 10 years. I've been all over the state, lived all over the state. I really think that's an untouched, people don't know what to do, where to go for help. And eventually, I mean, you hear things like Stone Soup, you hear things like ADRC or DDRC. Yeah. To a parent, that's like
It's a lot of acronyms.
it's a lot of acronyms. It sounds
It's
really
boring if you
government.
don't know
I was in
anything.
the Army, and this is a lot of acronyms.
No kidding. My husband's a retired Army officer, and we talk about what POC means a lot.
Support plan.
Yeah, and that's why I advocated for that big time. Come on, some support plans, please. Yeah, tell me more about how a family with a young child, maybe under 2 years old, a year old, when do they say, I need help. I mean, you mentioned doctor's offices.
Our doctor.
Well, yeah, and I
And
was.
that diagnosis said, here, call this woman, you need TEFRA.
I think a lot of
We
it
were very
is
lucky.
the care coordination agencies sending so many requests for TEFRAs to these doctors, because before it was only like the 2 care coordinators in the state, and now there's multiple agencies and their doctors' offices are constantly getting contacted. So that I think we've had referrals because doctors have been contacted by us so much, and they've seen the requests for information for TEFRA, that they have just told families, we know they do it, so give them a call. And
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I think what Josh is saying too is that there's not one easy way for families to know that they should apply for TEFRA, because how can you know to apply for something you have no idea
No,
what it is,
what
you
it
know?
is.
And so it's the idea that we're making sure that all of the doctors and people that they're seeing early on are the ones that know about TEFRA, that they're the ones that are saying like, oh, maybe you should do a TEFRA. And there have been a handful of times where I've gotten calls from families and I just go through my screening questions with them. And I'm like, oh, you don't even qualify for TEFRA because you already have Denali Kid Care.
Exactly.
It's the same thing, but it's because the doctor was like, oh, maybe you should get TEFRA. There's other people that are doing TEFRA. But really, it's the same level of coverage that you would get with Denali Kid Care. So if
just
the
a
family
different
is already,
It's
yeah.
a family-based income
Mhm.
qualification.
So if
Yeah.
you can qualify for Denali Kid Care instead of TEFRA, it's a better way, because TEFRA, there's so much paperwork involved
more.
and it takes a lot more time.
Mhm.
It's the
So,
same
but
package
you
that
may
they fill
transition
out.
from one and then need TEFRA, and then
Yeah.
it's still available.
Because it
You guys
keeps
should
the
talk to
family's
them.
income capped. And we shouldn't have families capping their income.
But if they qualify, if they're
If they already
If they're
do,
there
then
in
that's
town,
great.
they can go with
Yeah.
Mhm.
But most people qualify for TEFRA based on their income, most working families or like that. I mean.
Yeah, because
and-
TEFRA doesn't look at the family. they look
Right,
at the
they
child.
look at the
You
child.
don't do
Yeah,
this stuff for
and
TEFRA.
really-
Or for Denali Kid Care.
Uh-huh.
For Denali Kid Care, you only do the yellow packet.
Yeah.
And then the
So it's,
bank
What I'm saying
statements.
is they fill it out differently because it's
Oh,
child
yeah,
income.
the way that the
Mhm.
yellow
So-
packet is filled out for
Because my daughter
DPA.
went from kids to Denali Kid Care
uh-huh,
to TEFRA because of income change
right.
based
So
on her
when
income.
you're doing the yellow packet or the Gen 72 from DPA, the initial application, it's the same for everything from food stamps to public assistance and
Medicaid, yeah.
and TEFRA. So when you're filling it out, doing TEFRA, you're filling everything out as if your child is the one answering all the questions for themselves. So when it asks about their employment, if your child doesn't have a job, you say they don't have a job. If it asks about mortgage, car payments, all that, if they don't have it, then you answer no. But then there are things that you do need to list, like people in the household you can list, but you only need to list the child's social security number.
Nobody else.
Nobody else is in the house. And then
Anyone's been convicted, like some of them.
I don't even know if that matters, because it's based off of just the child. So, and let's see,
Health
health
insurance,
insurance.
yeah.
If there is health insurance available to the child, then that does need to be listed on there.
So on that, if they add the care coordinator as somebody who information can be
Oh,
released to,
yeah,
that
on
just
Appendix
covers
C.
all DPA?
This is Gen 58. There's the permission to release information. You can list a care coordinator there, or I think it was the Med 4. There was a spot
Yeah,
up
the
in
one
the
in the
corner
packets.
that
Some of this
you can
information
list
is
a care
changed.
coordinator. But that will get DPA to fax the Gen 140B, which is a coupon, basically telling the care coordinator that the application's been accepted and it's being reviewed and that you can go ahead and start your portion. And then Comagine Health will also get the same coupon or an email from DPA saying that they've received it and that this is the care coordination agency. And then Comagine will reach out and ask what level of care type you're seeking for them. And if they've already filled out all of this paperwork and sent in the application and they gave the care coordinator a copy, then the care coordinator can already get the ball rolling on all of the paperwork that they need. And it's a 90-day window from when all of this stuff is turned into DPA and they accept it to when everything is supposed to be completed.
So if they've listed the care coordinator there, then 6 months later, if Medicaid stops working, will they speak to the care coordinator?
No,
with that
DPA
release?
generally does not
It's only
reach
for
out to
that
care
application.
coordinators.
Okay.
And we'll say we've seen that it's only on the initial applications
Yeah.
that we're connected to the client, and then
Mhm.
other than that, like if we're getting
We-
a transfer
Yeah,
from
we generally
someone
don't
else,
get mail.
it's like DPA doesn't even
from
know, no matter how many
DPA.
appointment and care coordinator and releases we send them.
So care coordinators, you have to track the renewal, TEFRA renewal,
Yeah,
kind of
so-
yourself, because they don't let
Yeah,
you know.
So
Yeah.
Imagine sends us, when we get the renewal, they send us, or the approval, it's a one-page document that has the month, because it goes month to month, not specific day.
Right.
So it'll just be like May of this year to May of next year. And then they can continue to be on TEFRA until the end of the month of their 19th birthday. So if their birthday is in November, then the last day of November after they turn 19, they have to transition to adult Medicaid or a Medicaid waiver if that's the option that they want to take. Yeah. And
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Please go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
The adult Medicaid does not have a care coordinator
No,
associated.
adult Medicaid is just them as an adult applying based on their income.
Yeah, it'd be,
So if they can't work or they don't work or they have a job that doesn't make over the income requirement, then they can just apply for adult Medicaid
And
as
SSI
an
too.
adult. Yeah,
And
so-
SSI.
And SSI.
And what I have
Social
heard
Security,
is
yeah.
a lot of parents say to apply for SSI before they're an adult
Yeah.
because it's so much harder once they're an adult.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I just got a message today from a parent that went to the SSI office and said they had told her to do it about 2 months before 18, to at least try to start working on setting up that appointment. Yeah, they set her up and she's got it set up, bring in the paperwork and they'll help them process that.
And guardianship as well.
And guardianship
Yeah.
about 6 months before
Yeah.
they turn
Yeah,
18,
17.
you should look into it.
Is the best list of what's available for the families that cost sheet to know what they could be requesting?
No, there's a
Where would
Medicaid
they-
recipient handbook that
Okay.
I'm not sure if you could pick one up at a DPA office, just walk in and if they have them available. But it's about, I want to say 70 pages.
I think it's online.
Oh, it is.
There is a
online.
PDF online, but I couldn't even tell you where to go to find it.
DPA web.
Yeah,
Medicaid
maybe just
recipient.
Google Medicaid,
DPA
Alaska
web.
Medicaid recipient handbook.
Yeah.
It has an umbrella on the cover, I think.
It's a gripping reading.
When it pertains to you, it actually is.
Yeah. Because I've tried to look through it and find information that I didn't know the answer to before.
And yeah, you look through it, and you're like, wow, I didn't know we could do that. Okay, we're doing that.
I have a question about TEFRA and reimbursement. So if you have a family that goes and applies for TEFRA and then 3 months later is approved, my understanding is that it will not back pay any appointments that were.
In the
Up until
initial
that point.
application, they can request up to 3 months.
I
But
heard that
Not
the state
anymore.
was
Not anymore?
doing
Not
that.
anymore.
Well,
Qualis is no longer doing
okay,
it, so they
then-
won't do any retroactive.
I take that back.
Okay, I just
So
wanted to
it's-
make sure.
But it should
that
be
that
from the date that the application is submitted.
was-
Yeah.
Do not
so-
pay any doctor bills. And then they should be able to back bill Medicaid because
Up
the
to them.
Medicaid should go back to the date the application was submitted.
So, and it's even for that whole month of support. So let's say September 15, family turns in their application, they have their interview the next week. If they end up being approved, even if it's December, by the time the approval comes through, Medicaid will backdate all the way to September because that's when the application was submitted. In previous years and up until just a few months ago, there used to be the option to do retroactive. And so if a family turned it in September, they could say, yes, I already have some outstanding bills I need paid. They would go up to 3 months before that. So they'd have up to June. They no longer can do that because the provider that was willing to do the backdate retroactive level of care is no longer doing it. And so we can't ask for that anymore. So it's just up until the month that you submitted your packet for.
As long as the bank account's correct.
And do we know,
Yeah.
is Medicaid or Denali Care kind of doing the same thing? Is that,
It's
Yeah,
all, so it's all Medicaid. It's just one big umbrella of Medicaid. You just have different pools of kind of
I think
funding.
that's why there's an umbrella on the
Yeah.
handbook.
So
Yes.
it's like, it's all the same coverage, which is why if a family calls me and says like, oh, we already have Denali Kid Care, I'm like, just stay on it. It's not any different.
Much easier to qualify because you only have to do the yellow packet and give bank statements instead of the yellow packet, bank statements, all of this paperwork here, and then all of the paperwork the care coordinator needs signed.
Mhm. So if they already qualify for Denali Kid Care, even if somebody was like, ooh, you should apply for TEFRA, I still tell them, I recommend you don't, because you already qualify. If your income changes, like now your husband got a job and it's a better paying job, you're no longer in that income qualification, definitely reach back out. I'm happy to help you.
Mhm.
But there's no point in the family going through additional work and additional stress to have to do all the TEFRA paperwork and the TEFRA application when they're already getting the same level of
It's not gonna give them any
Yeah.
additional.
It's the same exact insurance coverage.
It's just how.
It's just how you
Mhm.
qualify
How you
for
get
it.
to it.